Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Trans Stupid, the show where I take a look at the wonderful, wonderful world of LGBTQIA++ news, because stupidity is so darn intersectional. And the first story that I want to talk about this week involves a friend of the channel, Mike Harlow. Now, for some of my viewers might recognise him from a number of my streams. Mike is a conservative commentator and, dare I say, activist who is a part of the Walk Away movement. Now, that particular movement was started by a man named Brandon Straka, which was set up to kind of show LGBT people in America that there is another way forward outside of the Democrats. Their events have been fairly popular with big-name guests such as Blair White, and it's proven to be a very popular movement. Now, last week during the Republican National Convention, Mike and Brandon were lucky enough to be invited for the final night and to see Trump's speech. But this story isn't about some gay guys going to watch Donald Trump talk in an event where it's either the best or the worst convention, depending on where your political allegiances lie, but rather what happened afterwards, as both Mike and Brandon were targeted by a number of Black Lives Matter activists who had been harassing Republicans that had been leaving that event. And sadly, they were actually assaulted, as this video shows.
Oh, really?
Really? That's fine.
I don't speak to people like that. I
Really?
really
You like something that's right? You like you don't. You want to do that? Little sausage.
Literally walking down the sidewalk.
Don't get me on there.
He's a Donald Trump supporter. He supports racism. Fuck him.
Fuck y'all.
Do you even know when I'm not
saying you. I'm not saying
For the record, we were walking down the street minding our own business, and you just physically assaulted.
No, it's not. You called me a faggot.
It's what a faggot ass said.
Look up the crime bill. All right.
Get away from me. You get away from me.
Do something to her? Yeah, do something to her. Fuck you.
According to Brandon in a tweet, he said, "I haven't endured an anti-gay attack like this in probably 10 years. Black Lives Matter activists physically assault me and Mike Harlow on our way into our hotel, calling us faggots and threatening us. The one girl comes back and knocks my friend's phone out of her hand. BLM equals violence." Now, this isn't necessarily the only time that both Brandon and Mike have received quite aggressive harassment from Antifa-affiliated or BLM-affiliated activists as kind of conservative gays. This is something which they are used to, but this is on a whole other level to what they have previously experienced. What I really want to have a look at, though, is the actual reaction to what happened to Brandon and Mike from within the LGBT community. After all, the only thing which really kind of connects us all is our sexuality or gender identity. So regardless of political beliefs, one would expect there to be certainly some sort of solidarity or condemnation of what happened. So let's take a look. According to Pink News, there isn't anything on their homepage, but if you type in Brandon Straka into the search bar, you will see that there's actually just a story on Brandon from a couple of months ago where he was unhappy to wear a mask on a flight. And that's it. So Pink News didn't cover it. That's fine. Let's take a look at Queerty, because Queerty say that they don't have an agenda except the gay one. So surely they will be in solidarity with two gay men who were assaulted and harassed, right? No. According to Queerty, it's big news if you are a conservative gay man who has an Instagram account they don't like, but not if you're actually attacked. What about LGBTQ Nation? What about them? I mean, they're another big name. No, of course they didn't comment on it either. Well, Gay Star News here, of course they didn't comment on it either. Of course, none of these outlets covered it. In fact, it was basically ignored by the progressive media, by progressive activists. They wanted to pretend that such a thing did not exist. Of course, this did not go unnoticed by Brandon, who was actually interviewed on Tucker Carlson's show, calling them out for their silence.
I would like to ask some of those in media, gay people like Anderson Cooper, Don Lemon, and Andy Cohen, do you have anything to say about the fact that 2 gay men were attacked last night by Black Lives Matter? Because you guys have been really supportive of this organization. I'd love to know what you think about that now that 2 people in your community were attacked by this organization.
What I find really frustrating about this is that we have this LGBT media who are there to purely talk about gay matters, lesbian matters, bi matters, trans matters. That's it. It shouldn't really be politicised. And yet, they only care if it is somebody on their side that is being harassed. If it is someone who has a different point of view, that is somehow not newsworthy. As I mentioned earlier, Queerty ran a story a few weeks ago on Breakback Patriot simply for having an Instagram account that they didn't like. And that whole article was simply them calling him out as this horrible person. That's when they want to talk about LGBT people who don't agree with them politically. It's like when they talk about Darren Grimes or Ariel Scorsella or Blair White. All they really care about is whether or not the person is towing the party line. That should not be tolerated. If the whole point of the LGBT movement is there for acceptance for everyone, regardless of their beliefs, but just simply down to them being lesbian, gay, bi, or trans, they should be caring that these people are being harassed, assaulted, threatened, but they're silent. They're silent because it's people who support a platform that they don't like, but it's also people doing the harassment. In this case, Black Lives Matter activists, openly Black Lives Matter activists. They don't want to smear that name either. They don't want to call out any of the homophobia on their side. That should not be a political issue. If left-wing gay people are being harassed by people on the right, by right-wing activists, that should be called out. But for some reason, when it's flipped around, no, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine for these people to be harassed and assaulted. Where is the commentary? Where is the condemnation here? This isn't the only time, of course, where they've outright ignored a conservative gay person being assaulted. Last year, Andy No was assaulted at a Antifa rally in Portland. Now, Andy is a gay Vietnamese conservative journalist. He's someone who has done a lot of reporting on Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of what we know of the riots that have been going on over the last couple of months is down to his reporting. He is an incredibly qualified journalist, and yet he is not somehow a big enough name for them to really care about, simply because, well, he has the wrong views. I don't get how these publications can claim to be for LGBT people when it's entirely only about their agenda politically. And I wouldn't mind that if they made that obvious, but they never ever do. They only ever talk about themselves as representing the community, not progressivism, not socialism, not any kind of political mindset. To them, it is, they lie. They frankly lie. Now, Brandon was actually assaulted a couple of days after this took place, as you can see in this video, where someone throws a cone at him.
If Black Lives Matter to you means that you need to go destroy neighborhoods, destroy black neighborhoods, destroy black businesses. I was the victim of a homophobic attack by Black Lives Matter 2 nights ago. No one has denounced their activities.
Black Lives Matter and you're burning down black businesses.
Boom! Relax!
I think that the likes of Brandon and Mike do a very good job in showing LGBT people that you don't just have to believe what the Democrats and what the left tell you to believe. You can be a conservative and gay. You can believe in whatever you want, because sexuality and gender identity, believe it or not, they have nothing to do with economic policy or social policy. It's simply down to who you are attracted to or how you identify. There should be nothing political about that, and yet these sides like to claim that it somehow is. It's absolutely unacceptable that this is being ignored, and it shows that if you are a right-leaning LGBT people, this side does not care about you. They don't care about you or me. And when they tell us that they're fighting for our rights, that they're fighting for us to be able to, live our lives whether or not we agree with them, they are, they're fighting for us. If you are on the right, you will have had activists tell you that is what they're doing. But the fact that they have been completely silent on this, that they refuse to condemn or even discuss it, tells us everything. They don't care about us. If you do not align with their views, to them you might as well not exist because you are that problematic to them. Now, in the last episode of Trans Stupid, I talked about how there is a weird push for fetishes to be included within the LGBT umbrella. There has been a bit of a success when you look at the Pride events to get this included when a lot of us really want nothing to do with it. To kind of highlight why we want to be completely separate from the fetish community, the story I want to talk about next is one which isn't strictly about being LGBT, but it is kind of a bit of a warning shot, and it is incredibly disturbing, but don't worry. There will be a bit of mind bleach afterwards. According to Metro, adult baby struggles to find work as employers don't like him wearing nappies at work.
Do you think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
Damien Turner has been a part of the adult baby diaper lover community for the last 10 years, meaning he wears nappies all day. But the 28-year-old from West Virginia says his lifestyle has caused problems in his professional life. Damien has been fired from previous jobs for childish behaviour, and he's now unemployed. Outside work, Damien is often teased about his choices and says he has lost friends. But he says that others within the ABDL community have welcomed him and helped him feel at home. He told the Metro, "Diapers are very convenient, comfortable and cute. It is a very nice lifestyle and I wouldn't want to do anything else. Dressing and acting like a baby gives off a very calm, relaxing, safe vibe. It's almost as if you were back in preschool without a worry in the world. Employment is hard. I'm constantly in and out of jobs. Sometimes my employers find my pictures online or just can't put up with the fact I'm wearing a diaper and acting childish in the workplace." He also says, "On the streets, everyone gives me weird looks. I always wear a diaper everywhere I go, and sometimes I'll only wear a onesie or just a shirt. Sometimes people take pictures or just walk the other way." So where do we kind of begin with this? This is someone who has a very open and embarrassing and disturbing fetish and lives it 24/7. They take their fetish into the workplace. Whilst they are being told to actually do adult jobs, they instead act like a child and walk around wearing a nappy. So everyone can see what they are doing when they are living out their fantasy in the workplace. And he then acts offended that for some reason employers don't like this. Employers don't like people acting sexual in the workplace. And he also complains that people make fun of him online when he's open about what he gets his kicks off. And he even walks around on the street just wearing a shirt and a nappy. And he wants sympathy from people like us because he gets harassed for it. Now, I've talked in the past about how I don't really judge people for having fetishes, and whatever they do in their own private lives is entirely up to them. However, when it crosses the line of going from the bedroom into the public space, then I actually do think that a level of public shaming is perfectly fine. This is because it's degenerate behaviour and it makes everyone uncomfortable. You are including people in your sexual fantasies when you act in such a way. That is exactly what this Damien guy has been doing. And he's acting in just the strangest way possible. Like, you're walking around just wearing a nappy in the middle of the street and you complain that people find it weird. I mean, yeah, everyone's going to find that weird. Everyone's going to find it weird because what you're telling people is that you just want to live your life wearing a nappy, making it, going to the bathroom in it, but don't make fun of me for it because I'm getting off over it. How is that a normal thing? Like, that is not something which should be socially accepted at any point. There is a difference between enjoying something in your own personal time and bringing everyone into it when it's something so embarrassing. Quite frankly, asking people not to make fun of you because you enjoy crapping yourself and letting everyone know about it. Of course, people are going to make fun of you for it. I think that's perfectly fine. You cannot tell people not to find that funny or weird or anything, really. It's not fair to tell people that they just have to pretend it doesn't exist and that somehow this is perfectly fine, a normal behaviour for society. This is real rot in community if this is allowed to go on. Where there's always been arguments against gay rights which talk about the decay of morality within society, but I don't believe that men or women being able to love or get married to people of the same sex is where the rot really lies. Instead, it's perverts like this who try and use more kind of liberal, progressive attitudes in current year to be able to normalise their own sexual kinks. This should not be openly tolerated by any employer. It should not be tolerated by society as a whole. If this is something you want to enjoy, by all means, you can do it in your own spare time. But when you start telling people about it, being very open about it, walking around the street and being in work and not actually doing your job, just wanting to mess around and wear a nappy and let everyone know that that's what you're doing? No, it's insulting. It's insulting to the people who have actually been discriminated in their workplaces based on their gender, on their sex, on their sexuality, on their race, on their disability, things that people can't control, things that is just innately who you are, and having a fetish is not an innate part of who you are. It's just something you enjoy. It's just a weird hobby. And I find it disturbing to even call it a hobby. It's freaky, and this kind of degenerate behaviour, no, it should never be tolerated. And when you allow people like this to be open about it and celebrate their sexuality in that way, when it's not the same as just simply falling in love with someone, but wanting to do a very disgusting act around other people, that's where the rot lies. And when you allow the kind of the fetishists who don't care about the way that others might feel about it, they just want to get their kicks off, these are the people who really need to be kind of kept away from society until they know how to behave, until they know how to be able to treat others in the room. This is a very, very weird and creepy thing to talk about, but I promised you some brain bleach, and good news that today is actually National Seal Day. It's National Seal Day, and so here is a incredible seal. Like, look at it, look at the way he furiously bounces towards the camera, squeaking his heart out, just letting you know he wants to be your friend. He is a good seal, and a good way to end this segment. Forget about the degeneracy, focus on the seal. Now, last year, one of the biggest kind of characters within LGBT news was, of course, Jessica Yaniv, who has now decided to call himself Jessica Simpson in kind of a weird tangent. I'm not sure kind of what is going on there. I do kind of believe that maybe Yaniv is doing this just as a way of getting out of the news, but still being able to carry on with their abusive behaviour so people can't properly track them. But kind of just moving a bit on from Yaniv, the big name in the LGBT news this year, kind of the complete opposite end of the spectrum, is JK Rowling. Now, I've done a couple of videos discussing Rowling over this year and how Rowling has since been outed as Queen TERF, how she is the most problematic person to have ever existed, and how this is kind of funny when you consider how a lot of the queer activists have completely fallen in love with Harry Potter over the years, only to find out that Harry Potter's author is the most problematic person on the planet. But Rowling has been up to a bit more over the last week. Some of you might have heard about this, where Rowling returned a Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award after there became a bit more of a problem regarding her own views. In a statement on her website, JK Rowling returned the Ripple of Hope Human Rights Award given to her last December. The decision came after President Kerry Kennedy issued a statement earlier this month to say that JK Rowling's recently expressed views diminishes the identity of transgender people. In a statement, Kennedy said, "I've spoken with JK Rowling to express my profound disappointment she has chosen to use her remarkable gifts to create a narrative that diminishes the identity of trans and non-binary people, undermining the validity and integrity of the entire transgender community, one that disproportionately suffers from violence, discrimination, harassment and exclusion, and as a result experiences high rates of suicide, suicide attempts, homelessness, and mental and bodily harm." Remember the terms suicide and suicide attempts. Rowling posted a statement to her own website explaining she chose to return the award after Kennedy incorrectly implied that she was transphobic, and that she wanted to really point out again that she doesn't hate trans people. But the story here isn't so much about Rowling returning an award, but it's more the response to it. And in particular, the response from Mermaids. Now, Mermaids is a highly controversial trans rights charity which is supposed to really focus on children and trans children, but they do find their way into the mainstream trans discussion, even regarding adults. And of course, Mermaids had to make a statement in order to kind of capitalise on everything which had been going on. And the second paragraph, they kind of get rid of their mask, and it's quite shocking, really. In the statement, they said, "As part of an email, we have disclosed something we hoped never to say. We say it now with permission from those involved. Without giving personal detail, without betraying confidences, we must represent the seriousness of the situation. We are aware, through our work with families, that there have been cases of self-harm and even attempted suicide following JK Rowling's statement and the public response on social media and in the press. Surely this must cause us all to pause and question the way young trans lives are being debated in public." It's absolutely horrifying that Mermaids would make this statement, and not because of the supposed attempted suicides. They are using that kind of narrative as a way of silencing any kind of discussion. All of this is anecdotal. There is absolutely nothing to suggest that people have indeed been attempting to take their lives simply because JK Rowling wrote a blog where she talked about her views on trans issues. If that is the case, then there is a lot more going on there than simply an author expressing her views that she is allowed to do. But this is emotional manipulation of the worst kind. And this is a problem with a lot of the trans narrative. I've previously discussed my own issues with suicide and having attempted it in the past. It's a very sore subject for me, but I am aware that that is all kind of down to me and not some sort of public pressure about this toxic environment where we're seeing, despite all these media outlets coming out in support of trans rights, all these celebrities speaking out about it, all this representation and inclusion that is being forced everywhere, even though the number of trans people is incredibly small. But the second you have someone disagreeing with it, that's enough to kind of push people over the edge, simply that. This is Mermaids wanting to shut people up and nothing more. That's all they care about. When they're saying, oh, surely we should all, just take a step back and think about what we're doing, they don't mean them. They don't mean the kind of threats that Rowling has received after making her statements. They don't mean the harassment that people who don't agree with these activists have received. They are not talking about any of that. All they want is for their opponents to shut up and know their place. That's all they are interested in. And they use these awful, awful tactics when they talk about how trans people are somehow bigger victims than everybody else on the planet. So shut up, don't talk about us. As though that's acceptable in modern discourse. The fact that they get away with this, that nobody questions them on it, that they take it at face value that trans people are constantly in attack, that we are constantly at risk of killing ourselves, simply because people disagree with us. It's not like Rowling has gone on to assault people. It's not like it's not like what Rowling has said has caused any kind of assaults. there might be people who are being trolls online, and I have seen some trans people be victims of online trolling. I've seen people on the other side be victims of online trolling as well. You can call out online trolling, but that's not what they're doing here. What they're doing is very specifically aimed at one person, one high-profile person who has been able to make a statement and despite all their efforts has not been cancelled for it. And they want her to shut up. They want anyone who is an opponent of theirs to be guilted into silence, to become social pariahs with no chance of retribution, that they are just going to disappear from public life. And the narrative will only be controlled by one side, which just so happens to be extremist in nature. I find Mermaids an abhorrent organisation. I find them emotionally manipulative. I find this kind of rhetoric about trans suicides to be abused by the trans side. You can acknowledge that a lot of trans people do suffer with suicidal thoughts. As I've previously said, I have as well. However, that is not an excuse to shut other people up, to say that they are not allowed their views, otherwise I'm going to kill myself. That is the kind of thing that somebody in an abusive relationship does. That is the way in which they gain control, and Mermaids doing that is absolutely no different. Of course, Mermaids is not the only charity or group to have these kinds of views in which you must shut up because trans people are always at risk. But this should not be an acceptable argument. It should be done on a fair playing field. You can call out harassment on both sides, but to claim that simply expressing a view is inherently hateful and is inherently going to cause people to take their own lives is abusive, it is controlling, and it should not be tolerated. If we want to have a sensible, reasonable discussion on trans issues, which we need, because I do think that there are extremist viewpoints on both sides. I do think that there are narratives that both sides push that are inherently toxic. But so long as we get comments like this, it's never going to really progress beyond the extremists yelling at one another. Mermaids needs to really grow up and understand that this is not an acceptable way of having this debate. But what are your thoughts on the subjects I've talked about this week? Is there anything in particular I've missed out? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. You can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, which is very much appreciated at this time. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you all so much, and I will see you all next time. And a special thanks to Alex Meadows, Alyssa Morris, Aurora T. Silver, Casey Adolphson, Dan Norman, Ida Meadows, Vanilla Cooney, James C. George, James UK, Jenny Morley, Jess, Joe, Kim Vandry, Latin Creature, Laura Manleaf, Moy Felicita, Rezi, Rose Hypnol, Steve Hendricks, Tennessee Barfly, The Poor of Rizzo, Zoe, Stefan Hansen, Laisha, Illiterati, and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.